The midnight streets of Los Angeles stretched endlessly under flickering streetlights, casting long shadows that danced across cracked asphalt. Elena Kade gripped the steering wheel of her $12 million prototype, knuckles white against the carbon fiber interior. The electric supercar hummed beneath her like a caged beast, its custom-built heart beating with the rhythm of innovation and desperation. She had driven this route 17 times in the past month, each test pushing the boundaries of what her engineers said was possible. Tonight was different. Tomorrow morning, the world would see what KadeX Motors had built. Forbes, TechCrunch, every major automotive publication would descend on her facility like vultures, ready to either crown her the youngest female tech CEO to revolutionize transportation, or tear apart her life's work with surgical precision. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The dashboard flickered. Once. Twice. "No," Elena whispered, her breath fogging the windshield. "Not tonight." The car lurched forward, then died completely. Every light extinguished, every system silent. The prototype coasted to a stop on a desolate stretch of road near the industrial district, where warehouses loomed like sleeping giants against the star-scattered sky. Elena's hands trembled as she reached for her phone. 3 calls. Victor Chang, her lead engineer, answered on the first ring, voice thick with sleep. "The car's dead," she said without preamble. "Everything. Complete system failure." "Impossible," Victor replied, suddenly alert. "I ran diagnostics myself yesterday. Every component was perfect." "Well, your perfect components just left me stranded 24 hours before the biggest reveal in company history." Within 30 minutes, 2 black SUVs arrived. Victor emerged from the first, tablet in hand, muttering technical jargon to himself. Jerome J.D. Davis stepped out of the second, his ex-Marine posture unmistakable even in civilian clothes. As head of corporate security, J.D. had seen Elena navigate crises before, but never with this much riding on the outcome. "What do we know?" J.D. asked, scanning the empty street. "Nothing," Elena said, pacing beside the silent car. "It just stopped." Victor connected diagnostic equipment to hidden ports beneath the hood, his movements precise but increasingly frantic. Numbers scrolled across his screen in cascades of green text, each reading more confusing than the last. "The battery's fine. Motors are operational. Software shows no errors." He looked up, eyes wide with something approaching panic. "According to every diagnostic I have, this car should be running perfectly." A soft cough echoed from the darkness beyond the streetlight's reach. Elena spun around, instinctively moving closer to J.D., who had already positioned himself between her and the sound. From the shadows emerged a figure that seemed assembled from the forgotten corners of the city. Grease-stained jeans hung loose on a frame that spoke of too many skipped meals. Work boots, cracked and weathered, moved with surprising quiet across the asphalt. The man's face was hidden beneath a baseball cap, but his eyes, those were alert, intelligent, taking in details that others might miss. "You folks need help?" The voice was gravelly but gentle, like sandpaper wrapped around silk. J.D. stepped forward, one hand instinctively moving toward his concealed weapon. "We're fine, thanks. Move along." But Elena found herself studying the stranger. There was something about the way he carried himself, the way his gaze moved over the car with professional interest rather than mere curiosity. This wasn't someone looking to cause trouble or beg for money. This was someone who understood machines. "You know cars?" she asked, ignoring J.D.'s warning look. The man nodded slowly. "Some." Victor scoffed, not looking up from his tablet. "This isn't a car. This is a prototype electric hypercar with technology you've never seen before. The diagnostic systems alone cost more than most people see in a lifetime," the stranger finished quietly. "I know." He moved closer, hands clasped behind his back in a gesture of respect rather than submission. Elena noticed his fingernails, clean despite the grease on his clothes, the sign of someone who took pride in his work even when the world had forgotten to take pride in him. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the open hood. Elena found herself nodding before her rational mind could object. Victor stepped aside with obvious reluctance. muttering about insurance liability and corporate security protocols. The stranger, Mark, though they wouldn't learn his name until much later, leaned over the engine compartment. He didn't touch anything, just observed. His eyes moved in a pattern Elena recognized from her own engineers, but there was something different. Where her team saw systems and specifications, this man seemed to see the soul of the machine. "Your ground fault isolation is pristine," he said after a moment, surprising Victor with his technical vocabulary. "Battery management system is military grade, but—" He paused, tilting his head like a doctor listening to a patient's heartbeat. "But what?" Elena asked. Mark reached into his pocket and pulled out what looked like a coat hanger, straightened and bent into a precise L shape. JD tensed, but Mark moved with deliberate slowness, clearly aware of the security man's concern. "Sometimes the fanciest diagnostics miss the simplest problems," Mark said. He touched the improvised tool to a connection point deep in the engine bay, then to another. A tiny spark jumped between the contacts. "There." He reached into another pocket and produced a small electronic component, a resistor that couldn't have cost more than $2. With movements that spoke of decades of practice, he located a burned-out component, no bigger than a grain of rice, and carefully replaced it. "Try starting her now," he said, stepping back. Elena slid into the driver's seat, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pressed the ignition button. The car hummed to life instantly, every system responding as if it had never failed. Victor stared at his diagnostic equipment in shock. That's impossible. Our systems would have caught that." "Not if you weren't looking for it," Mark said simply. "Sometimes the problem isn't with the technology. Sometimes it's with the expectation." Elena stepped out of the car, studying this man who had just saved her company's future with pocket change and intuition. "What's your name?" Mark was already walking away, disappearing back into the shadows between warehouses. "Just glad I could help, ma'am." "Wait," Elena called. "I need to." But he was gone, leaving only the distant sound of footsteps echoing off empty buildings. JD immediately began scanning the area, his trained eyes searching for any trace of the mystery mechanic. "Get me everything you can on him," Elena said quietly. "I don't care what it takes." "Why?" JD asked. "He fixed the car. We're good." Elena looked at the prototype, now running perfectly, then back at the darkness where Mark had vanished. Because someone that good doesn't just appear out of nowhere. And someone that good doesn't just walk away. As they loaded the car onto a transport trailer, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter had changed something fundamental. Not just about the car, but about everything. In a world where she measured worth in algorithms and profit margins, a man with grease under his fingernails had just reminded her that brilliance didn't always come dressed in designer suits. 24 hours until the reveal, but now, all she could think about was the ghost mechanic, who had saved her dream with a $2 part and walked away without asking for anything in return. The industrial lot sprawled beneath the morning sun like a metallic ocean, waves of rusted car parts and abandoned machinery stretching toward the distant smog line of downtown LA. J.D. Davis sat in his black SUV, camera with a telephoto lens resting on the passenger seat, watching a converted van parked between towers of discarded appliances and forgotten dreams. 2 days of discreet investigation had led him here, to this forgotten corner of the city where people lived in the spaces between society's attention. The license plate from a security camera 3 blocks from where the prototype had broken down, a few carefully placed questions to the right contacts. The trail of Mark Reyes had been surprisingly easy to follow once JD knew where to look. What surprised him was what he found. Mark emerged from the van as the sun climbed higher, stretching arms that showed the wiry strength of someone who had spent his life working with his hands. He wore the same grease-stained jeans from 2 nights ago, but his hair was damp from washing, his face cleanly shaved. Even living out of a van, the man maintained his dignity. JD lifted the camera, then hesitated. Something about this felt wrong, invasive in a way that his military background hadn't prepared him for. He was used to surveilling threats, not documenting poverty. A small tent sat nearby, canvas patched with duct tape and held down with carefully arranged bricks. From it emerged an elderly woman, moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose bones remembered harder times. Her gray hair was braided neatly, and despite the obvious wear on her clothes, she carried herself with quiet grace. "Morning, Dottie," Mark called, his voice carrying genuine warmth. "Morning, dear," the woman replied. "Coffee's already brewing." They shared a small camp stove between their dwellings, the flame blue and steady beneath a battered aluminum pot. JD watched Mark pour coffee into two mismatched mugs, offering the less chipped one to his neighbor. The gesture was automatic, unconscious, the kind of courtesy that spoke to character rather than calculation. "You sleep better last night?" Dottie asked, settling onto a folding chair that had seen better decades. "Some," Mark replied, "had the strangest dream about Lily. She was showing me a drawing she'd made of some fancy car. All electric, she said, going to change the world." JD's grip tightened on the camera. "Lily? Who was Lily?" "That girl's got your mind for machines," Dottie said with a smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes, "and your heart for fixing broken things." Mark pulled a worn sketchbook from his back pocket, opening it to reveal pages of detailed mechanical drawings. But interspersed between the engine schematics and technical diagrams were simpler sketches. A small girl with pigtails, hearts and flowers in the margins, careful lettering that spelled out Lily's dream car. "She's probably forgotten all about me by now," Mark said quietly. "Children don't forget love," Dottie replied. "They might get confused by circumstances, hurt by disappointment, but love, that stays." JD lowered the camera. This wasn't what he had expected to find. He had prepared himself to investigate a potential threat, someone who might try to exploit their encounter with Elena. Instead, he was watching a man tend to an elderly woman's needs, sketching dreams of a daughter he couldn't see, maintaining hope in circumstances that would crush most people's spirits. Mark's phone buzzed, an ancient flip phone that looked like it had survived several tours of duty. He answered with a cautious, "Hello?" JD couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but he watched Mark's posture change. Hope flickered across his features, then disappointment, then resignation. "I understand," Mark said. "Maybe next month." He closed the phone and sat heavily on a crate that served as his chair. "Visitation?" Dottie asked gently. "Housing situation isn't stable enough yet," Mark replied. "Social worker says maybe when I have a permanent address." JD felt something twist in his stomach. The man who had saved Elena's $12 million prototype couldn't see his own daughter because he didn't have a fixed address. Mark stood, walking to a nearby pile of scrap metal. JD watched him select pieces with the precision of a jeweler, bending and shaping them with tools that looked like they had been crafted rather than bought. Within an hour, a small toy car had emerged from the refuse, not crude, but elegant in its simplicity. Every detail carefully considered, from the wheels that actually turned to the tiny hood that opened to reveal a miniature engine. "For the donation box at St. Mary's," Mark explained to Dottie, "kids there don't get much." "You don't have much either," she pointed out. "I have enough," Mark replied, "and more than some." As the afternoon wore on, JD documented a life that existed in the margins of the city most people never saw. Mark helped an elderly man replace a fan belt on a truck older than some buildings. He shared his lunch with a teenager whose eyes held the hollow look of someone who had aged too quickly. He repaired Dottie's camping chair with the same attention to detail he had shown Elena's prototype. When evening came, Mark sat outside his van, sketching by the light of a battery-powered lantern. JD could see the drawing taking shape. Another car, but this one was different. Sleek, electric, impossibly elegant. In the driver's seat, a small figure with pigtails waved from behind the wheel. "Dreams don't cost nothing," Dottie said, settling into her Reaper. Irid chair. "But they're worth everything." "You think she'll ever get to drive something like that?" Mark asked. "I think," Dottie said carefully, "that dreams have a way of finding the people who believe in them hard enough." JD's phone vibrated with a text from Elena. "What did you find?" He stared at the message for a long moment, then at the scene before him. A man who had lost everything but his integrity, living with dignity in circumstances that would humble kings. A father whose love for his daughter burned bright enough to light the darkness of a junkyard. JD typed back, "Still investigating, need more time." As he drove away, JD couldn't shake the image of Mark's sketchbook. Page after page of dreams rendered in careful pencil strokes. A father's love translated into mechanical precision and artistic hope. He thought about Elena's world of corporate boardrooms and million-dollar prototypes. Then about this forgotten corner of the city where a man built toys from trash and shared coffee with neighbors who had nothing left to give but kindness. The contrast should have been stark, unbridgeable. Instead, JD found himself thinking about the moment Mark had fixed Elena's car. The confidence in his movements, the quiet competence that needed no audience or applause, the same hands that shaped scrap metal into toys, had diagnosed a problem that had stumped engineers with advanced degrees. That night, JD sat in his apartment, staring at the photos he had taken but couldn't bring himself to show Elena. Not yet. First, he needed to understand something. What did you call a man who had everything taken from him but refused to let go of his ability to give? The answer came to him as he fell asleep. You called him dangerous. Not to Elena's safety, but to every assumption JD had made about worth, dignity, and what it meant to be successful in America. Mark Reyes was going to change everything. JD just didn't know how yet. Elena stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office, watching the city wake up 30 floors below. The successful prototype reveal had bought her breathing room with the board, but the mystery of the man who had made it possible consumed her thoughts like an unsolved equation. JD's knock interrupted her brooding. He entered carrying a manila folder and wearing an expression she had learned to read over their 3 years of working together, the look of a man who had discovered something that changed everything. Tell me about him, Elena said without turning from the window. Marcus Reyes, 42 years old. Former NASCAR crew chief. Specialized in engine diagnostics and electrical systems. JD's voice was carefully neutral, the tone he used when delivering information that would complicate her life. Lost his wife to cancer 4 years ago. Medical bills wiped out their savings, then their house. Lost custody of his 10-year-old daughter when he couldn't maintain stable housing. Elena finally turned, studying JD's face. And now? Lives in his van near the industrial district. Takes cash jobs where he can find them. Helps his neighbors. Builds toys from scrap metal for kids who don't have any. JD paused. Elena, this man has nothing, but he's not broken. Everyone's broken, Elena said automatically. The only question is whether they're broken in useful ways. JD's expression hardened. That's not what I'm saying. Elena took the folder, flipping through photos that felt invasive even as they fed her curiosity. Mark helping an elderly woman. Mark working on a beat-up truck with tools held together by electrical tape. Mark sitting alone in the evening light, sketching in a notebook with the concentration of a master artist. What does he want? She asked. From you? Nothing. He doesn't even know you're looking for him. Elena closed the folder. That was the problem, wasn't it? In her world, everyone wanted something. Board members wanted power. Engineers wanted recognition. Investors wanted returns. The absence of desire was so foreign it felt like a trap. I want to hire him, she said. As what? A consultant? A contractor? I don't know yet, but someone who can see what my entire engineering team missed? Someone who carries a $2 part in his pocket and knows exactly when to use it? Elena moved to her desk, fingers drumming against the polished surface. That's not luck. That's instinct built on decades of experience. JD shifted uncomfortably. He's proud, Elena. Whatever approach you take, it can't feel like charity. Everything's charity when you have nothing. No, JD said firmly. Everything's charity when you think having nothing means being nothing. There's a difference. Elena stared at him, recognizing an echo of moral authority she hadn't heard from JD since his military days. You like him. I respect him. There's a difference. 2 hours later, Elena sat in her Tesla Model S in the parking lot of a coffee shop 6 blocks from the industrial district, rehearsing conversations that felt increasingly hollow. Through the window, she could see Mark at a corner table, nursing a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold an hour ago, reading a library book on advanced automotive electronics. He looked different in daylight, away from the shadows and broken machinery of the lot where he lived. Older, perhaps, with lines around his eyes that spoke of loss and sleepless nights. But there was something else, a quality of attention, of presence, that made her understand why JD had been reluctant to share those photos. Elena entered the coffee shop and approached his table with the confidence that had carried her through hostile boardrooms and skeptical investors. Mr. Reyes. Mark looked up, recognition flickering across his features. Ms. Kade, Elena Kade. She gestured to the empty chair across from him. May I?" He nodded, closing the book but keeping one finger tucked between the pages as a bookmark. The gesture suggested a man who expected interruptions but refused to lose his place. "I wanted to thank you," Elena began, "for what you did the other night." "No need. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Elena said, "they wouldn't have. My lead engineer couldn't diagnose that problem, neither could his team." "But you saw it in minutes." Mark's expression grew guarded. "Sometimes an outside perspective helps." Elena opened her briefcase and withdrew a folder containing a standard consulting agreement. "I have a proposition for you. KadeX Motors is preparing to launch our electric vehicle line. We could use someone with your diagnostic skills." Mark glanced at the contract but didn't touch it. "What kind of work?" "Problem solving, troubleshooting. The kind of thinking that finds simple solutions to complex problems." "And what makes you think I'm qualified for that?" Elena leaned forward. "Because you carry a resistor in your pocket, just in case. Because you see problems that diagnostic computers miss. Because you fixed a $12 million prototype with a $2 part and walked away without asking for anything." Mark was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with the same intense focus he had brought to her car's engine. "What's the catch?" "No catch. Just a contract. Fair wage, flexible hours. I don't have an address for tax forms. I don't have references from employers who'll admit they hired someone off the books. I don't have the kind of credentials that look good in corporate environments." Mark's voice remained steady, but Elena caught the edge of old pain beneath the words. "Are you sure you want to hire someone like me?" Elena felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition of the courage it took to name your own disadvantages. "I'm sure I want to hire someone who can fix what others can't." Mark opened the folder, scanning the terms with the practiced eye of someone who had learned to read contracts carefully. The base salary was more than he had made in the past 2 years combined. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "This is too much," he said. "It's market rate for specialized consulting." "For someone with my background?" Elena met his eyes directly. "For someone with your ability." Mark closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. "There's something you should know about charity, Miss Kade. It feels different from the inside than it does from the outside." "This isn't charity." "Then what is it?" Elena found herself saying words she hadn't planned. "It's a chance. For both of us." Mark studied the contract again, then looked out the window toward the distant silhouette of downtown LA. Elena followed his gaze, trying to see the city through his eyes, not as a landscape of opportunity, but as a place where second chances were rarer than venture capital. "One condition," Mark said finally. "One day, trial basis. If it doesn't work out, no harm, no foul." Elena wanted to argue, to insist on a longer commitment, but something in Mark's expression warned her that pushing would close a door she might never get open again. "One day," she agreed. Mark tucked the contract into his jacket pocket without signing it. "I'll think about it." As he left the coffee shop, Elena remained at the table, staring at the empty chair across from her. She had negotiated million-dollar deals with Fortune 500 companies, convinced skeptical investors to fund impossible dreams, and built a company from nothing but ambition and caffeine. But she had never encountered someone who treated opportunity like a loaded weapon, something that could explode in your hands if you weren't careful how you held it. Outside, Mark walked back toward the industrial district, past the clean storefronts and manicured sidewalks that marked the boundary between the world Elena inhabited and the one he called home. The contract in his pocket felt heavy as a stone, weighted with possibilities he wasn't sure he could trust. That evening, as he sat outside his van watching Dottie tend to a small garden she had coaxed from the hard-packed earth, Mark pulled out the contract and read it again by lantern light. "Job offer?" Dottie asked, without looking up from her tomato plants. "Maybe, from the woman whose car I fixed." "Rich woman?" "Very rich." Dottie straightened, brushing soil from her hands. "What does your heart tell you?" Mark folded the contract carefully. "That I'm tired of being afraid." "And your head?" "That being tired of something isn't the same as being ready to change it." Dottie smiled, the expression lighting up her weathered face. "You know what I've learned in my 73 years, Marcus? Sometimes you can't steer a ship that's anchored in pride. But sometimes, pride is the only thing keeping you from drifting into rocks. Mark looked at the contract one more time, then at the sketch pad where Lily's face smiled up at him from a dozen different drawings. A daughter who didn't know her father was considering stepping back into the world that had once promised him everything before taking it all away. "One day," he said to the darkness, "I can survive one day." In her penthouse apartment across the city, Elena stood at another window, looking out at lights that twinkled like stars in the smog. Somewhere out there, in a van parked between forgotten machinery, a man was deciding whether to trust her with his pride. She had never wanted anything more than she wanted him to say yes, and that terrified her more than any board meeting or product launch ever could. The KadeX Motors facility sprawled across 15 acres of Culver City like a temple to technological ambition. Glass and steel reached toward the sky in clean lines that spoke of precision, efficiency, and the kind of money that turned dreams into reality. Mark stood at the visitor entrance, clutching a temporary security badge that felt foreign against his chest, watching through floor-to-ceiling windows as engineers in pristine white coats moved between workstations like priests tending electronic altars. "First time?" asked the receptionist, a young woman whose smile was professionally warm but genuinely kind. "Yes, ma'am," Mark replied, his voice quieter than he intended. "You'll love it. This place builds the future." Mark nodded, though he wasn't sure the future had room for someone like him. JD appeared in the lobby, dressed in his usual black suit but wearing an expression that seemed almost encouraging. "Ready for the tour?" As they walked through corridors lined with concept sketches and prototype displays, Mark felt the weight of every curious glance from passing employees. His work boots squeaked against polished floors that reflected overhead lights like mirrors. His jeans, clean but worn, seemed to announce his otherness with every step. "Try not to let them intimidate you," JD said quietly. "Half these people couldn't change their own oil." The main workshop opened before them like a cathedral of innovation. Robotic arms moved with balletic precision, assembling components that gleamed under LED lighting. Workstations equipped with diagnostic equipment worth more than most houses hummed with quiet efficiency. And suspended in the center of it all, like a jewel in a setting designed to showcase its beauty, hung Elena's prototype. "Impressive," Mark said, and meant it. Victor Chang emerged from behind a bank of monitors, tablet clutched in his hands like a shield. His designer glasses caught the workshop lights as he approached, and Mark could see the exact moment when Victor cataloged every detail of his appearance and found it wanting. "So you're our consultant," Victor said, loading the word with enough skepticism to power a small city. "I'm Mark," came the simple reply. Dr. Chang led the engineering team that designed the prototype, Elena said, appearing at Mark's shoulder. She wore a white lab coat over dark jeans, somehow managing to look both authoritative and approachable. "Victor, Mark is the one who identified the ground fault issue." Victor's expression suggested he had swallowed something unpleasant. "Yes, well, anyone can get lucky once." Mark walked to the suspended car, hands clasped behind his back in the same respectful posture JD had observed at the junkyard. But here, surrounded by the tools and technology of his former world, something shifted in his bearing. His shoulders straightened, his eyes sharpened. The uncertain man from the lobby began to fade, replaced by someone who belonged in workshops, even ones this advanced. "May I?" Mark asked, gesturing toward the diagnostic station. Victor stepped aside with obvious reluctance. Mark's fingers moved across the interface with surprising familiarity, calling up system reports and data streams with the efficiency of someone who understood machines at a fundamental level. "Your battery thermal management system is elegant," Mark said, scrolling through temperature readings. "But you're getting micro fluctuations in the cooling loops. Nothing that would trigger an alert, but over time." "Over time what?" Elena asked. Mark highlighted a series of data points that painted a pattern invisible to casual observation. "Over time, you'll get hotspots, reduced efficiency, possibly thermal runaway if the pattern amplifies." Victor leaned over Mark's shoulder, studying the screen. Those fluctuations are within acceptable parameters." "For now," Mark agreed. "But thermal systems are like rivers. Small changes upstream create big problems downstream." He moved to the physical components, pointing to connections that looked perfect to untrained eyes. "See this? Joints probably loose by a few thousandths of an inch. Not enough to show up on standard diagnostics, but enough to create resistance. Resistance creates heat. Heat creates expansion. Expansion creates more looseness. Positive feedback loop. Elena watched Victor's expression change from skepticism to concentration to something approaching alarm. Can you fix it? Mark was already reaching for tools, selecting a precision torque wrench with the care of a surgeon choosing scalpels. His movements were economical, purposeful, each adjustment measured and deliberate. Within minutes, he had identified and corrected 17 micro-issues that would have caused problems months down the line. Test it now, Mark said, stepping back. Victor ran the diagnostics again. The micro-fluctuations had vanished. Temperature readings were perfectly stable across all systems. On his tablet screen, efficiency projections increased by 3%, an improvement that would translate to millions in performance gains. The workshop had grown quiet. Other engineers had gravitated toward their workstation, drawn by the kind of problem-solving they rarely witnessed. Mark seemed oblivious to the audience, focused entirely on the machine before him. "Where did you train?" asked a young engineer named Sarah, her voice filled with genuine curiosity. "Everywhere," Mark replied, cleaning the torque wrench with the same attention he had brought to its use. "NASCAR pits, Army motor pools, backyard garages. Wherever something was broken and needed fixing." Victor studied the diagnostic readings with the expression of someone whose fundamental assumptions were being challenged. This shouldn't be possible. Our quality control systems should have caught these issues. Your quality control systems are looking for big problems, Mark said gently. But sometimes the biggest problems start smaller than your instruments can measure. Elena found herself remembering a conversation from business school about the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge was what you learned from books and classrooms. Wisdom was what you learned from failure, from fixing things that shouldn't have broken, from making something work when all the theory said it couldn't. As the afternoon wore on, Mark moved through the workshop like water finding the path of least resistance. He helped Sarah troubleshoot a sensor calibration issue that had stumped her for weeks. He showed a junior engineer how to identify bearing wear by sound alone. He suggested modifications to assembly procedures that would prevent problems the engineering team hadn't known they had. But it was the moment with Elena that JD found most revealing. She had asked Mark to review the charging system specifications, expecting a quick consultation. Instead, Mark spent an hour with documents, sketching modifications in the margins with careful pencil strokes. "What if you reversed the polarity on the auxiliary systems during fast charging?" Mark suggested. "Counter-rotate the magnetic fields to reduce eddy current losses." Elena stared at the sketches, seeing elegance where she had expected confusion. That could increase charging speed by 15%. "Maybe more," Mark said. "Depends on the implementation." Victor, who had been watching from across the room, approached with the careful steps of someone navigating unfamiliar terrain. "That's actually brilliant. Why didn't our team think of that?" Mark looked up from the drawings, meeting Victor's eyes directly. "Because your team was focused on making something new. Sometimes you need someone who remembers how things used to work to see how they could work better." As evening approached and the workshop began to empty, Elena found Mark sitting alone at a workbench, sketching in his personal notebook. The drawing, taking shape, showed a car that was somehow both futuristic and timeless, electric but elegant, advanced but accessible. "What's this one?" Elena asked. "Just dreaming," Mark replied, thinking about what a car might look like if it was designed by someone who had to fix it. Elena studied the sketch, seeing details that spoke to repairability, sustainability, and the kind of thoughtful engineering that prioritized function over flash. "It's beautiful." "It's practical," Mark corrected, but he smiled when he said it. As they prepared to leave, Victor approached with something that might have been respect in his expression. "Will you be back tomorrow?" Mark looked at Elena, then at the workshop where he had spent the day remembering who he used to be. "If Miss Kade thinks there's more, I can contribute." "There is," Elena said without hesitation. Walking to the parking garage, JD fell into step beside Mark. "How was it, being back in a place like this?" Mark was quiet for a long moment, considering, like putting on clothes that used to fit. "They're a little loose now, a little faded, but they remember the shape of who I was." "And who are you now?" JD asked. Mark looked back at the KadeX building, its windows glowing with the warm light of people working late, solving problems, building the future. Still figuring that out. That night, in his van parked between towers of forgotten machinery, Mark sat under his battery-powered lantern and wrote a letter he would never send. Dear Lily, today I worked in a place where they build cars like the ones in your drawings. Tomorrow I might do it again. I'm starting to remember what it feels like to fix things that aren't broken yet. I love you, Dad. He folded the letter carefully and placed it with dozens of others in a cigar box that served as his most precious possession. Someday, maybe, she would read them all. Someday, maybe, she would understand that every day he didn't give up was a day he chose to believe in tomorrow. 3 weeks into his consultancy at KadeX, Mark had developed routines that spoke to careful navigation between worlds. He arrived each morning at 7:30, 30 minutes before the official start time, parking his van in the far corner of the employee lot where its rust and primer spots wouldn't draw attention. He showered at the YMCA 6 blocks away, ate breakfast from a thermos of coffee and a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, and entered the building carrying a worn leather tool bag that had survived 2 decades of honest work. Inside, he had become something between ghost and guardian angel. Engineers would find diagnostic reports on their desks, problems solved before they knew they existed. The coffee maker in the break room stayed operational despite its advancing age. A wobbly desk here, a squeaky chair there, small improvements that made the workspace more comfortable for everyone. But when lunchtime came, Mark retreated to his van. Elena discovered this on a Tuesday afternoon when she went looking for him to discuss the charging system modifications. She found him in the parking lot, sitting on the van's bumper, eating a peanut butter sandwich while sketching in his notebook. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, holding up a salad from the company cafeteria. Mark gestured to a folding chair that had seen better decades. "Not much luxury, but you're welcome." They ate in comfortable silence, watching clouds drift across the Los Angeles sky. Elena found herself studying Mark's profile, noting the quiet contentment in his expression. This was a man at peace with solitude, she realized, not someone hiding from social interaction. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said finally. "Shoot. Why don't you eat lunch with the team? They'd welcome you." Mark set down his sandwich, considering the question with the same careful attention he brought to mechanical problems. "Because I don't want anyone to feel like they have to be careful around me. Like they can't talk about their weekend plans or their mortgage payments or their kids' college applications." Elena felt something twist in her chest. "You think they'd judge you?" "I think they'd be kind," Mark replied, "and sometimes kindness can be harder to carry than judgment." That afternoon, Elena found herself paying attention to conversations she had never noticed before. Talk of vacation plans to Cabo, complaints about property taxes, casual references to private schools and housekeepers, and the kind of financial concerns that came with having too much money rather than too little. She began to understand Mark's exile. On Thursday, she discovered him under the hood of a Honda Civic in the parking lot, tools spread on a towel with military precision. The car belonged to Sarah, the young engineer who had been so fascinated by Mark's diagnostic techniques. "Alternator?" Elena asked. "Belt tensioner," Mark replied without looking up. $90 part, but the shop wanted to charge her $400 in labor. "You don't have to fix everyone's car problems." Mark straightened, wiping his hands on a rag that had once been white. "Don't have to, want to. There's a difference." Elena watched him work, noting the economy of his movements, the way he anticipated which tool he would need next. This wasn't just mechanical aptitude. This was artistry born from necessity. "My father would never understand you," she said suddenly. Mark paused in his work. What kind of man was he? The kind who believed everything had a price, and if you weren't willing to pay it, you didn't want it badly enough. Elena sat on the concrete, not caring what it did to her designer jeans. "He died thinking I was weak because I chose engineering over business school." "Were you weak?" "I was 22 and thought I could change the world with good intentions and better algorithms." Elena laughed, but the sound held no humor. "Turns out the world doesn't change just because you want it to." Mark lowered the hood of Sarah's car, gathering his tools with practiced efficiency. "Maybe. Or maybe it changes one alternator belt at a time." Squeaky chair there. Small improvements that made the workspace more comfortable for everyone. But when lunchtime came, Mark retreated to his van. Elena discovered this on a Tuesday afternoon when she went looking for him to discuss the charging system modifications. She found him in the parking lot, sitting on the van's bumper, eating a peanut butter sandwich while sketching in his notebook. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, holding up a salad from the company cafeteria. Mark gestured to a folding chair that had seen better decades. "Not much luxury, but you're welcome." They ate in comfortable silence, watching clouds drift across the Los Angeles sky. Elena found herself studying Mark's profile, noting the quiet contentment in his expression. This was a man at peace with solitude, she realized, not someone hiding from social interaction. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said finally. "Shoot." "Why don't you eat lunch with the team? They'd welcome you." Mark set down his sandwich, considering the question with the same careful attention he brought to mechanical problems. "Because I don't want anyone to feel like they have to be careful around me. Like they can't talk about their weekend plans, or their mortgage payments, or their kids' college applications." Elena felt something twist in her chest. "You think they'd judge you?" "I think they'd be kind," Mark replied. "And sometimes kindness can be harder to carry than judgment." That afternoon, Elena found herself paying attention to conversations she had never noticed before. Talk of vacation plans to Cabo, complaints about property taxes, casual references to private schools and housekeepers, and the kind of financial concerns that came with having too much money rather than too little. She began to understand Mark's exile. On Thursday, she discovered him under the hood of a Honda Civic in the parking lot, tools spread on a towel with military precision. The car belonged to Sarah, the young engineer who had been so fascinated by Mark's diagnostic techniques. "Alternator?" Elena asked. "Belt tensioner," Mark replied without looking up. $90 part, but the shop wanted to charge her $400 in labor. "You don't have to fix everyone's car problems." Mark straightened, wiping his hands on a rag that had once been white. "Don't have to. Want to. There's a difference." Elena watched him work, noting the economy of his movements, the way he anticipated which tool he would need next. This wasn't just mechanical aptitude. This was artistry born from necessity. "My father would never understand you," she said suddenly. Mark paused in his work. What kind of man was he? The kind who believed everything had a price, and if you weren't willing to pay it, you didn't want it badly enough. Elena sat on the concrete, not caring what it did to her designer jeans. "He died, thinking I was weak because I chose engineering over business school." "Were you weak?" "I was 22 and thought I could change the world with good intentions and better algorithms." Elena laughed, but the sound held no humor. "Turns out the world doesn't change just because you want it to." Mark lowered the hood of Sarah's car, gathering his tools with practiced efficiency. "Maybe. Or maybe it changes one alternator belt at a time." "Someday," Mark whispered to the empty van. "Someday." He started the engine and drove back to the industrial lot, to his spot between the machinery graveyard and Dottie's small garden. But as he settled into his sleeping bag that night, Mark carried with him the memory of respect in JD's voice, of Elena sitting on concrete to share lunch, of Sarah's grateful smile when her car started without the expensive alternator replacement. For the first time in 4 years, Mark Reyes allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he was building something worth keeping. Something that couldn't be taken away by circumstances or systems or the cruel arithmetic of poverty. Something that might, eventually, be enough to bring his daughter home. The rain came to Los Angeles like an unwelcome memory, turning the usually sun-baked streets into mirrors that reflected neon and possibility. Elena stood at her office window, watching water cascade down glass while her reflection wavered like a ghost uncertain of its substance. Below, the city moved with the careful urgency that rain brought to a place unaccustomed to weather. Her laptop screen showed the results of a search she had been conducting for 3 days. Records, documents, the digital archaeology of a life interrupted. Mark's life, spread across databases and court filings, and social service reports that painted a picture more complex than the humble consultant who fixed cars in parking lots. Marcus Reyes, NASCAR crew chief for Hendrick Motorsports, team leader on 2 Cup Series championships, innovator whose engine modifications had been adopted industry-wide, a professional at the top of his field until medical bills and grief and the grinding arithmetic of American healthcare had reduced him to sleeping in a van. But it was the custody documents that made Elena's chest tighten. Lily Catherine Reyes, age 10, removed from her father's care not due to abuse or neglect, but because, quote, housing instability poses a risk to the child's educational and emotional development. A little girl taken from her father because society had decided that love without a fixed address wasn't enough. Elena had spent 2 days trying to locate Lily through proper channels: social services, family court records, foster care databases. The trail led to a middle-class neighborhood in Pasadena, to the home of Janet and Robert Morrison, a couple in their 50s who had been fostering children for 15 years. Now Elena sat in her Tesla outside their modest ranch house, watching rain bead on the windshield, trying to find the courage to knock on a door that might hold the key to healing a man who had fixed her broken machine with pocket change and dignity. The Morrisons were exactly what central casting would order for foster parents: kind eyes, gentle voices, the sort of people who chose to open their home to children who needed safe harbor. Janet Morrison answered the door with flour on her apron and concern in her expression. "Can I help you?" Elena had prepared a story about being a family friend, about wanting to deliver something from Mark to his daughter. But standing on the threshold of this comfortable home, surrounded by the sounds of normal family life, the lies died in her throat. "I work with Lily's father," she said instead. "I wanted to see if there was anything she needed, anything I could do to help." Janet's expression softened with recognition and something that might have been relief. "You're the first person from Marcus's new job to reach out. Please, come in." The house was exactly what Elena had expected: clean but lived in, filled with the comfortable chaos of children and the kind of furniture that prioritized function over fashion. Photos lined the mantelpiece, showing dozens of children who had found temporary safety here over the years. "She's in her room working on homework," Janet said, leading Elena toward the kitchen where something that smelled like homemade bread was cooling on wire racks. It's been hard for her." "How so?" Janet poured coffee into mismatched mugs, the kind of casual hospitality that made Elena realize how sterile her own living space had become. "She loves her father, talks about him constantly. But she's also angry, you know? Children don't understand why adults can't fix things that seem simple to fix. Like having a place to live. Janet sat across from Elena at a table scarred by years of homework and art projects and the daily business of raising children. "Marcus is a good man. I've met him during visitations. But the system doesn't care about good. It cares about stability, measurable outcomes, boxes that can be checked." Elena sipped her coffee, tasting something that had been made with attention rather than efficiency. What does she need? To see her father more than 2 hours every other weekend. To believe that someday they'll be a family again. To stop feeling like she was abandoned because she wasn't worth fighting for. The words hit Elena like physical blows. She thought of Mark in his van, sketching pictures of a daughter who lived 30 miles away but might as well have been on another planet. She thought of the letters he wrote but never sent, the toys he carved from scrap metal and donated to strangers because he couldn't give them to the one child who mattered most. "Could I meet her?" Elena asked. "Just for a moment?" Janet studied Elena's face, reading something there that satisfied whatever test foster mothers use to judge strangers. "Lily? Someone's here to see you." The girl who appeared in the kitchen doorway was smaller than Elena had expected, but her eyes held the same intelligent intensity that marked her father's gaze. Dark hair fell in careful braids, and she wore jeans with patches that had been sewn on with more care than fashion demanded. "Hi," Lily said quietly. "Hi," Elena replied. "I'm Elena. I work with your dad." Lily's expression changed, wariness replaced by something that might have been hope. "Is he okay?" "He's fine, more than fine. He's helping us build some really amazing cars." "Like the ones he used to work on? For NASCAR?" Elena felt her heart break a little at the pride in the girl's voice. "Even better, these cars are going to help save the planet." Lily moved closer, studying Elena with the fearless curiosity of childhood. "Daddy says the future is going to be electric. Says gas engines are like dinosaurs. Really cool, but their time is over." "He's right. Your dad is helping us make sure the future gets here a little faster." From her pocket, Elena withdrew something she had brought on impulse, a small model of the KadeX prototype, no bigger than a toy car but perfectly detailed. "He asked me to give you this." It was a lie, but it felt like truth as Lily's face lit up with wonder. She took the model with careful hands, turning it over to examine every detail. "It's beautiful," Lily whispered. "Did he really help make this?" "The real car wouldn't run without him," Elena said. and that was true enough to count. Lily clutched the model car against her chest, and for a moment Elena saw Mark's expression mirrored in his daughter's face. The same quiet wonder, the same appreciation for things built with care and precision. "Will you tell him something for me?" Lily asked. "Of course. Tell him I still have the elephant." Elena looked puzzled, and Janet provided the context. "The last toy he made her before she came here, a wooden elephant. She sleeps with it every night." Elena felt tears threaten, but she managed to keep her voice steady. "I'll tell him." As she prepared to leave, Janet walked her to the door. "What you did today, bringing that car, taking time to visit, it matters more than you know. I didn't do much. You saw her, really saw her. Most people look at foster kids like they're problems to be solved, or statistics to be managed. You saw a little girl who misses her daddy." Driving back through the rain-soaked city, Elena carried with her the image of Lily's face when she held that model car. The pure joy of a child receiving something precious, something that connected her to a father who built beautiful things with his hands. That night, Elena made a decision that would have shocked her board of directors and terrified her legal team. She began making calls, quiet inquiries to housing advocates and family law attorneys, and anyone who might know how to navigate the system that separated fathers from daughters for the crime of being poor. Meanwhile, in his van parked between discarded machinery and forgotten dreams, Mark sat under his battery-powered lantern, writing another letter he would never send. "Dear Lily, today I helped design a charging system that might change how electric cars work forever. I thought about you the whole time, about how you're going to inherit a world that runs on clean energy and second chances. I love you more than all the stars in the sky, Dad." He folded the letter and added it to his collection, then opened his sketchbook to a fresh page. Instead of cars or engines, he drew a little girl with braids, holding a wooden elephant, smiling at a future that hadn't arrived yet but was getting closer every day. Neither Mark nor Elena knew that across the city, in a comfortable house in Pasadena, that same little girl was falling asleep clutching a model car and dreaming of the day when her father would come home for good. Homebotting is sea. The rain continued to fall, washing the city clean, preparing it for whatever tomorrow might bring. The confrontation came on a Wednesday morning that had started like any other, with Mark arriving early to review diagnostic reports and Elena preparing for a board presentation that would determine the future of the electric vehicle program. But sometimes the most devastating earthquakes begin with the smallest tremors, and this one started with a photograph. Mark found it tucked under his windshield wiper when he returned to his van for lunch, a black and white image printed on cheap paper showing Elena's Tesla parked outside the Morrison house. On the back, someone had written in block letters, "Ask her what she was really doing there." Mark stared at the photograph for a long moment, his world tilting on its axis. The timestamp showed it had been taken 3 days ago during the rainstorm. Elena had been inside that house, Lily's house, for over an hour. His hands trembled as he folded the photograph and slipped it into his pocket. The peanut butter sandwich he had been eating turned to ash in his mouth. By the time Elena emerged from her afternoon meeting, Mark was waiting in her office, sitting in the chair across from her desk with the stillness of a man who had run out of places to run. "We need to talk," he said. Elena closed the door behind her, noting something in Mark's posture that made her pulse quicken. He looked like someone bracing for impact. "What's wrong?" Mark placed the photograph on her desk, aligning it with the same precision he brought to mechanical work. "Want to explain this?" Elena's face went pale as she recognized the image. "Mark, I can explain. You went to see my daughter." His voice was quiet, controlled, but Elena could hear the fury underneath. "Without telling me, without asking permission, you went into her home and—" "What? Checked up on her? Evaluated her living situation?" It wasn't like that. Mark stood, pacing to the window that overlooked the workshop where he had spent 6 weeks rebuilding his sense of purpose. "Then what was it like? Because from where I sit, it looks like a rich woman decided to investigate the broken mechanic's family situation. I brought her something. A model of the car you helped to design. I wanted her to know you were doing important work." Mark spun around, and Elena saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Raw pain mixed with rage. "You told her it was from me?" "I thought—" "You thought wrong." Mark's voice rose, years of suppressed anger finally finding its target. "Do you have any idea what you've done? She's gonna ask me about that car. She's gonna want to know about my job, about whether I'm finally getting my life together. And what am I supposed to tell her? That I'm still living in a van? That her father is still just another charity case for a billionaire with a guilty conscience?" Elena felt tears sting her eyes. "That's not what this is, isn't it?" Mark pulled out his phone, the ancient flip model that had survived years of hard use. "I've been getting calls from social services. Seems someone has been making inquiries about my case. Someone with connections, with resources. Someone who thinks money can fix things that aren't supposed to be fixed with money." "Mark, please, let me explain." But Mark was beyond listening. The careful walls he had built around his heart, the protective distance he maintained from hope and disappointment, came crashing down all at once. "You want to know what the worst part is?" he said, his voice breaking. "For 6 weeks, I actually believed this was real. I thought maybe someone finally saw Marcus Reyes, the engineer, instead of Mark, the homeless guy. I thought maybe I had earned something through my work, through my skills, through who I am instead of what I lack." Elena stepped toward him, hands outstretched. "You did earn it. Everything you've accomplished here was part of some kind of rehabilitation project. Poor broken Marcus. Let's fix his life the same way he fixes our cars. Let's reunite him with his daughter and make ourselves feel better about the world." "That's not true." Mark laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Then why didn't you tell me? Why this secret visit? Why the private investigators digging into custody records? Why the quiet inquiries to family lawyers?" Elena's silence was answer enough. "Because you knew," Mark continued, "that if you asked me, I would have said no. Because you knew that what I want more than anything in this world is to earn my daughter back, not have her handed to me by someone who thinks poverty is a problem that can be solved with the right connections. I was trying to help. You were trying to play God." Mark's voice was steady now, flat with exhaustion. "And the hell of it is, it might actually work. Your lawyers might find loopholes, your money might grease the right palms, and I might get Lily back. But I'll never know if it was because I became worthy of her or because Elena Kade decided to add, quote, reuniting families to her list of charitable causes." Elena felt something break inside her chest. "Mark, you are worthy of her. You've always been worthy of her. Then why couldn't I keep her?" The question hung in the air between them like a blade. Why couldn't I fix the one thing that mattered most? Elena had no answer for that, because the truth was ugly and systematic and bigger than either of them could solve alone. Children were taken from loving fathers because society had decided that love without resources wasn't enough. Good men lived in vans while bad men lived in mansions. And the system that was supposed to protect children often sacrificed families on the altar of bureaucratic efficiency. Mark walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. "I'm done. With the job, with the consulting, with all of it. Mark, please don't. And stay away from my daughter." His voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Whatever game you're playing, whatever guilt you're trying to assuage, leave her out of it. She's been hurt enough." The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like the ending of something that had never quite begun. Elena stood alone in her office, staring at the photograph that had destroyed everything. Outside her window, she could see Mark walking across the parking lot toward his van, shoulders set with the kind of determination that came from burning bridges behind you. She wanted to run after him, to explain that her motivations had been pure even if her methods were flawed. She wanted to tell him that seeing Lily's face light up when she held that model car had been worth any amount of professional risk. She wanted to say that some problems were too important to leave to pride and proper procedures. Instead, she sank into her chair and stared at the place where Mark had sat, remembering the first night when he had fixed her broken car and walked away without asking for anything in return. He had been protecting his dignity then, just as he was protecting it now. The difference was that then, she had been the one who needed saving. Now, she was the one causing the damage. Elena picked up the photograph, studying the image of her own car parked outside a house where a little girl waited for her father to come home. The timestamp showed 2:47 p.m. on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The moment when Elena Kade, in trying to play guardian angel, had instead become the thing that drove Mark Reyes back into the darkness he had been fighting so hard to escape. She had fixed his car with a $2 part and walked away without expecting gratitude. She had tried to fix his life with million-dollar resources and destroyed everything that mattered. The irony was almost perfect. The industrial lot felt smaller without hope to fill the empty spaces between rusted machinery and discarded dreams. Mark sat on a folding chair outside his van, watching the sun sink toward the Pacific while Dottie tended to her impossible garden in soil that should have grown nothing but weeds and broken glass. 3 days had passed since he had walked out of KadeX Motors, and the silence felt heavier than any engine he had ever carried. His phone, the ancient flip model that connected him to a world he was no longer sure he belonged to, had buzzed 17 times with calls from Elena, from JD, from Sarah and other engineers who had grown accustomed to finding their problems solved before they knew they existed. He hadn't answered any of them. "You're gonna wear a hole in that piece of ground with all your pacing," Dottie observed, without looking up from the tomato plants she was coaxing toward life. Mark realized he had been walking back and forth between his van and the discarded transmission that served as his property line, following the same path over and over like a caged animal. "Sorry," he said, settling back into the chair that had molded itself to the shape of his grief over the past 4 years. "Nothing to apologize for. Man's got a right to wrestle with his demons." Dottie straightened, brushing soil from hands that had seen 7 decades of work and worry. "Question is whether you're wrestling to win or just to keep from getting bored." Mark pulled out his sketchbook, more from habit than inspiration. The pages fell open to drawings of Lily, of cars that would never be built, of a workshop that existed only in pencil lines and fading hope. "She meant well," he said quietly. "Most people do. Devil's in the execution. I should have stayed, finished the job, been professional about it." Dottie settled into her own chair, a lawn seat that had been repaired so many times it was more duct tape than fabric. "Should is a dangerous word, Marcus. Makes you think the past could have been different if you'd just been smarter or stronger or better than you were." Mark sketched absently, his pencil finding the familiar contours of his daughter's face. What if she was right, though? What if I'm just too proud to accept help when it's offered? And what if you're just too wise to accept help that comes with strings attached? Before Mark could respond, the sound of footsteps on gravel announced a visitor. J.D. Davis emerged from between the towers of scrap metal, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who had come to deliver difficult news. "Brought reinforcements," J.D. said, offering one of the cups. Mark accepted the coffee, noting that it was from the good machine in the executive break room. "Elena send you?" "Elena doesn't know I'm here. Figured we could talk man to man, without corporate politics getting in the way." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching the last light fade from the western sky. Downtown LA glittered in the distance. All promise and ambition and the kind of dreams that required more resources than most people would ever possess. "She's been sleeping in her office," JD said finally. 3 nights straight. Won't go home, won't eat anything but vending machine coffee and whatever Sarah brings her from the cafeteria. Mark's pencil paused in its movement across the page. "That's not my problem anymore." "Isn't it?" JD turned to face him directly. "Look, I've been doing security work for 15 years. I've seen every kind of manipulation, every angle people use to get what they want. And I'm telling you, what Elena did, visiting your daughter, making those calls, it wasn't calculated. It was clumsy and wrong-headed, but it wasn't calculated." "Then what was it?" JD was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words with the precision of someone who understood that truth could cut as deeply as lies. It was someone who's never had a family trying to understand what it means to lose one. Mark looked up from his sketchbook, studying JD's face in the dim light from the battery-powered lantern. "Elena's father died when she was in college," JD continued. "Heart attack at 53, right there in his office. Never met a grandchild, never walked her down an aisle, never got to see what she built with the company he started. And her mother took one look at the life insurance payout and decided she'd rather spend it on a beach in Tuscany than watch her daughter struggle with his legacy. That doesn't justify anything, but it explains it." JD leaned forward, his voice carrying the weight of witnessed truth. When Elena saw that photograph of your daughter holding the elephant you carved, when she realized that a little girl was going to sleep every night wondering if her father still loved her, she saw her own childhood. She saw what it felt like to be abandoned by the people who were supposed to protect you. Mark felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the anger that had sustained him for 3 days. So she decided to fix it. She decided to try. Wrong methods. Pure motives. Story of her life, really. Dottie, who had been listening with the patient attention of someone who had survived long enough to recognize truth when she heard it, spoke up. What did she actually do, this Elena? Besides visit the child? JD reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder, placing it on the upturned crate that served as their table. See for yourself. Mark opened the folder, revealing documents that made his heart race. Housing applications for apartments he could afford on his KadeX salary. Contact information for family lawyers who specialized in custody cases. A detailed analysis of what it would take to meet the court's requirements for overnight visitation. But at the bottom of the pile was something that made Mark's breath catch in his throat. A lease agreement for a small apartment in Pasadena, 2 bedrooms, walking distance from Lily's school. The monthly rent was exactly 30% of what KadeX had been paying him. She never signed anything, JD said quickly, seeing Mark's expression. Never made any commitments, never contacted anyone on your behalf. She just researched. Like she was trying to understand the maze you'd have to navigate to get your daughter back. Mark studied the lease agreement, noting details that spoke to careful consideration rather than hasty charity. Good neighborhood, but not ostentatious. Close to public transportation, near a library where Lily could do homework and parks where they could walk on weekends. Why didn't she give this to me directly? Because she knew you'd react exactly like you did. Because she was afraid that offering to help would make you think she didn't believe you could do it yourself. Mark closed the folder, but he didn't push it away. What does she want from me now? Nothing, JD said simply. She thinks you hate her. She thinks she destroyed the best thing that happened to either of you in years. She's convinced herself that staying away is the kindest thing she can do. Maybe it is. JD finished his coffee and stood, preparing to leave. Maybe. Or maybe 2 people who are good at fixing machines need to learn how to fix the things that actually matter. As JD's footsteps faded into the distance, Mark sat with Dottie in the gathering darkness, the folder resting between them like a bridge he wasn't sure he was brave enough to cross. What do you think? He asked. Dottie smiled, the expression lighting up her weathered face. I think pride is a fine thing to have, Marcus, but it's a terrible thing to hide behind. That night, Mark sat under his lantern and wrote a letter he might actually send. Dear Elena, I've been angry for 3 days and I'm tired of carrying it around. Maybe we could talk. Maybe there's a difference between fixing someone and helping them fix themselves. Maybe I've been wrong about a lot of things. Yours, Mark. He folded the letter carefully and placed it on his dashboard, where he would see it first thing in the morning. Outside, the city stretched away in all directions, full of broken things, and people who knew how to repair them, if they could just find the courage to try. The KadeX Motors media event was scheduled to begin at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday morning that felt pregnant with possibility and disaster in equal measure. Elena stood at the podium in the company's main presentation hall, looking out at an audience of automotive journalists, tech bloggers, potential investors, and industry analysts who had come to see whether her electric supercar could live up to 3 years of carefully managed hype. Behind her, covered by a silk drape, sat the prototype that had started everything, the car that had brought Mark into her life and, through her own fumbling attempts at kindness, driven him away again. Ladies and gentlemen, Elena began, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest, today, we're going to show you the future of transportation. But before we do, I want to tell you about the man who made it possible. Victor Chang, sitting in the front row with the rest of the engineering team, shifted uncomfortably. They had rehearsed this presentation a dozen times, and Elena's opening remarks had never included a lengthy discussion of the mysterious consultant who had vanished a week earlier. Sometimes, Elena continued, breakthrough innovation comes from unexpected places. Sometimes, the solution to a complex problem isn't found in advanced algorithms or cutting-edge materials, but in the wisdom of someone who understands that technology is only as good as the human insight that guides it. In the back of the room, near the exit where he could disappear if necessary, Mark Reyes stood with his hands clasped behind his back, wearing the only dress shirt he owned and wondering what the hell he was doing there. The letter Elena had found under her office door that morning had been simple. "I'll be there for the demo. We still need to talk. -M." She hadn't known whether to laugh or cry when she read it, so she had done both. "The car you're about to see wouldn't exist without Marcus Reyes," Elena said, and several journalists looked up from their notes with sudden interest. A human story was always more compelling than technical specifications. Mark is a master diagnostician who can identify problems that our most sophisticated equipment misses. He's an innovator who sees solutions where others see obstacles. And he's a man who taught me that expertise doesn't always come with the right credentials. Elena pressed a button on her remote, and the silk drape fell away to reveal the prototype in all its sleek, impossible beauty. The audience murmured appreciatively. Cameras flashed, and somewhere in the back of the room Mark felt his chest tighten with something that might have been pride. "But before I tell you about the car," Elena said, "I want Mark to tell you about the problem he's solved. Mark, would you join me?" Every head in the room turned toward the back, where Mark stood frozen between his desire to run and his need to see this through. J.D. Davis, positioned near the stage, caught his eye and nodded encouragingly. Mark walked down the aisle between rows of seats, past reporters and investors and industry experts who measured worth in stock options and patents, and the kind of success that could be quantified in spreadsheets. His work boots squeaked slightly on the polished floor, and his dress shirt pulled across shoulders that had been shaped by years of physical labor. But when he reached the stage and looked out at the audience, something remarkable happened. The nervousness that had followed him down the aisle evaporated, replaced by the quiet confidence of someone who knew his craft. "6 weeks ago," Mark began, his voice carrying clearly through the room's sound system, "this car was dead in the water. Beautiful engineering, brilliant design, but it wouldn't run when Miss Kade needed it most." He moved to the prototype, running his hand along its carbon fiber hood with the familiarity of someone who had spent hours studying every component. The problem wasn't complex, just a burned-out resistor smaller than your fingernail. But it was hidden in a place where diagnostic computers don't think to look, surrounded by systems so advanced that everyone assumed the simple stuff was working fine. A journalist in the third row raised her hand. "What's your background, Mr. Reyes? Where did you train?" Mark paused, and Elena held her breath, remembering his reaction to similar questions at KadeX. "Everywhere," Mark said simply. "Army motor pools in Kuwait, NASCAR garages in North Carolina, my father's repair shop in El Paso, the parking lot behind St. Vincent's where guys like me fix cars for people who can't afford the dealer prices." The room was silent, hanging on every word. See, the thing about cars is they don't care about your degree or your zip code or how much money you have in the bank, they just want to run. And if you listen to them, really listen, they'll tell you what's wrong. Mark moved to a workstation that had been set up beside the prototype, where Victor's diagnostic equipment displayed streams of data on multiple monitors. "Miss Kade asked me to look at the thermal management system," Mark continued, pulling up temperature readings that showed perfect stability across all systems. "Computer says it's working flawlessly. But computers don't feel vibration in their fingertips or hear the tiny whistle that means a seal is wearing out." He indicated almost imperceptible variations in the data that painted a pattern only visible to eyes trained by decades of experience. "This car is going to be amazing," Mark said, looking directly at Elena. "But it's going to be amazing because the people who built it understood that technology and intuition aren't enemies, they're partners." The questions came quickly after that. Technical inquiries about the charging system modifications Mark had suggested, business questions about the partnership between KadeX and their mysterious consultant, personal questions about Mark's background, his future plans, his thoughts on the intersection of traditional automotive knowledge and cutting-edge electric vehicle technology. Mark answered them all with the steady competence of someone who had rediscovered his place in the world. Elena watched from the side of the stage, seeing him through the eyes of reporters and investors who weren't looking at his clothes or his address, but at his expertise and his character. As the formal presentation concluded and the audience moved toward the reception area, Elena and Mark found themselves alone on the stage, separated by the prototype that had brought them together and nearly driven them apart. "Thank you," Elena said quietly. "For what?" "For coming, for giving me a chance to apologize publicly, for letting me share the credit." Mark looked at the car that had started everything, then at Elena, who was still wearing the expression of someone who wasn't sure if she had been forgiven. "I read the lease agreement," Mark said. "The housing applications, the legal research, all of it." Elena's face went pale. "Mark, I can explain." "You already did, in the most public way possible." Mark gestured toward the reception area where journalists were still discussing the presentation. "You could have taken all the credit for the modifications, for the problems we solved. Instead, you made sure everyone knew that the homeless guy living in a van was the one who saved your $12 million prototype. Because it was true, because it mattered to you that people knew it was true, because you understood that being seen matters almost as much as being valued." Elena felt tears threaten, but she managed to keep her voice steady. "Does this mean you'll consider coming back? The job offer is still open." Mark was quiet for a long moment, studying the prototype that had become the symbol of second chances neither of them had thought they deserved. "I'll come back," he said finally, "but not as your consultant." Elena's heart sank. "Then as what?" Mark smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. "As your partner. Equal stakes, equal say, equal responsibility for whatever we build next." Elena stared at him, processing words that redefined everything she thought she knew about pride and generosity and the difference between helping someone and empowering them. "Partners," she repeated. "Partners," Mark confirmed. "Building something neither of us could create alone." From the reception area, they could hear the sounds of laughter and conversation as journalists and investors discussed the future of electric vehicles and the unlikely partnership that might just change how the world moved. Elena extended her hand toward Mark, and when he shook it, the gesture felt like the beginning of something that had nothing to do with charity and everything to do with mutual respect, shared vision, and the kind of trust that could only be built one $2 repair at a time. 6 months after the demo that changed everything, Mark stood in the doorway of Reyes and Kade Custom Electric, watching his daughter bent over a workbench, tongue poking out in concentration as she assembled a small motor from salvaged parts. The garage smelled of metal shavings and possibility, of coffee brewing in the corner, and the kind of honest work that built tomorrow one careful repair at a time. "How's it coming, kiddo?" Mark asked, settling onto a stool beside Lily's workbench. "The flux capacitor is giving me trouble," Lily replied with mock seriousness, using the joke terminology they had developed for particularly stubborn components. Mark laughed, the sound echoing off walls covered with sketches, patents, and a single photograph of Dottie tending her impossible garden. She had passed peacefully in her sleep 2 months ago, but her words about dreams finding the people who believed in them hard enough had become the unofficial motto of their little operation. Elena emerged from the office, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing jeans stained with the honest grime of someone who worked with her hands as much as her head. The partnership had transformed them both. Elena learning the satisfaction of building things that could be touched and tested. Mark rediscovering the joy of innovation unencumbered by corporate bureaucracy. "The Morrison order is ready," Elena announced, setting 1 cup beside Mark's elbow. 3 custom conversions all tested and ready for pickup. Their business model was elegantly simple. Take classic cars and retrofit them with electric drivetrains designed for performance, reliability, and the kind of beauty that came from function following form. They weren't competing with Tesla or Mercedes. They were creating something entirely new for people who understood that the future didn't have to abandon the past. Lily looked up from her project, grease smudged on her cheek in exactly the same place where Mark carried his perpetual stain. "Can I ride along for the delivery?" "If you finish your homework first," Mark replied, ruffling hair that had grown longer in the months since she had come to live with him permanently. The custody hearing had been anticlimactic in the end. A stable job, a proper apartment, character references from everyone at KadeX. The bureaucratic barriers had fallen like dominoes once Mark had the resources to navigate them properly. The judge had looked at Lily's face when she was asked where she wanted to live, and that had been the end of it. Elena watched the easy interaction between father and daughter, feeling the same quiet contentment that had settled over her life like dust on a well-used workbench. She had never wanted children of her own, but being part of Lily's life had taught her something about family that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with choice. "The Stanford inquiry came back," Elena said casually, sorting through the mail. "They want to license our battery thermal management design." Mark looked up from helping Lily calibrate her motor, his expression carefully neutral. How much? Enough to expand, maybe open a second location. Maybe start that engineering scholarship we talked about. They had discussed it before, using their success to create opportunities for kids like Lily, for people like Mark who had the skills but not the credentials to break into traditional engineering programs. A different kind of disruption, one that measured worth in problem-solving ability rather than pedigree. As afternoon faded into evening and Lily worked on homework at a desk they had built together from reclaimed wood and salvaged metal, Mark and Elena stood in the doorway watching traffic flow past their storefront windows. "You know what I realized today?" Elena said quietly. "What's that?" "We never did figure out who took that photograph. The one that started our big fight." Mark was quiet for a moment, then smiled. "Does it matter anymore?" Elena considered this, thinking about the chain of events that had led from that moment of crisis to this moment of peace. Sometimes the worst things that happened to you were also the most necessary. "No," she said finally. "I guess it doesn't." Above their heads, a neon sign flickered to life in the gathering darkness. Reyes and Kade Custom Electric. Built on belief, powered by second chances. It had cost exactly $2 more than Elena had budgeted, but Mark had insisted on the addition. Some things, he said, were worth the extra expense. Inside the garage, surrounded by the tools of their trade and the warm light of work well done, three people who had found each other in the spaces between broken dreams and impossible repairs continued building tomorrow, one small fix at a time. The future, it turned out, had room for everyone after all. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.